Imagine waking up not to an alarm, but because a stranger is tossing and turning right next to you. Your head is on a sack of straw, a chamber pot sits under the bed, and dust and debris occasionally rain down from the ceiling. Welcome to the average medieval European bedroom. Last time we talked about when people slept. Today, let's see how it actually happened. Why a bed could cost as much as a house, why you had to share it with strangers, and why bed curtains were a matter of life and death. Let's start with a surprising fact. To a medieval person, a bed was far more than just furniture. The golden sheets, luxury of fabric. In the Middle Ages, a bed wasn't just furniture. It was one of the most valuable things in the house, sometimes worth more than the family's hut itself. In notary records and wills from the 14th and 15th centuries, the phrase "a bed with all its furnishings" appears right near the top, just after land, livestock, or tools. The reason is simple. A bed wasn't about the wood. It was about textiles, which were incredibly expensive. Flax had to be grown, soaked, combed, spun, and hand-woven. Wool blankets took months to full and weave. Every sheet, every pillowcase, every canopy curtain, dozens of hours of labor. A full bedding set could cost as much as a craftsman's yearly income. So the bed was a status symbol. The poor slept on straw sacks near the hearth or right on a bench against the wall. But if a family owned a real bed with a wooden frame, that meant you were looking at the late Middle Ages version of a middle class. That's why they guarded the bed like capital. It was passed down through inheritance, moved when they moved, and written into marriage contracts. In a way, it was the center of the home, where people were born, got sick, received guests, and eventually died. But even if you had the luxury of a real bed, that didn't mean you'd get that elusive thing called a peaceful night's sleep. No privacy, bedmates, and taverns. Today, a bed is almost sacred territory. Most medieval people simply couldn't afford privacy, a concept that was virtually non-existent back then. Homes were small, poorly heated, and the nights were cold. The bed became a shared resource, something between a bedroom and a hostel. In an average family, parents, kids, and sometimes even servants all slept together, in one big bed or on pallets by the hearth. This saved space and helped everyone survive the freezing night. But the real surprise was waiting for travelers. In a tavern, you didn't pay for a room, you paid for a spot in the bed, and very often that spot was already taken. The innkeeper would just point to the wide bed against the wall where several people were already lying and say there's room for one more. You could end up next to anyone. A merchant, a soldier, a pilgrim, someone you've never seen before in your life. This wasn't about trust, it was just the simple math of heat and space. Over time, an unspoken etiquette even emerged. Lie with your back to your neighbor, keep your hands on top of the blanket and don't hog it. But even with those rules, nights were rarely calm. Snoring, elbowing, and arguing over space, all perfectly normal. Still, for a 15th century person, waking up next to a stranger was completely normal. But if you think that's the strangest thing about a medieval bed, wait until we look inside the mattress itself. Straw and mice, the rotten mattress. Let's peek inside a medieval bed. What we call a mattress today was usually just a large canvas sack, a palliasse far from modern comfort. The rich could afford luxury fillings, feathers, down, or sheep's wool. But for the vast majority of Europeans, things were much simpler. Their mattresses were stuffed with ordinary straw, dry grass, or reeds. That sounds harmless enough at first, but the problem is that straw ages very quickly. Under your body weight, it breaks down, turns into fine dust, and absorbs everything. Sweat, moisture from the cold air, the smell of smoke from the hearth. After just a few weeks, that mattress starts to smell like rotting hay and dampness, and that's only half the problem. The straw filling became the perfect hideout for small critters. Mice could gnaw through the fabric and build nests inside, and this wasn't rare, it was a pretty common household issue. On top of that, fleas, beetles, and other insects would move in, feeling right at home. That's why mattresses were regularly beaten. They had special wooden sticks for this. You didn't just smooth the straw, you literally shook the whole palliasse, trying to beat out every single rodent and insect hiding there. But getting rid of this tiny ecosystem was nearly impossible. If you didn't change the straw once a season, the palliasse quickly became a source of stench, dust, and parasites. And then sleep became a real nightly battle for just a few hours of rest. Yet even straw, mice, and insects weren't the strangest detail of the medieval bed. because the next thing people spent the night on could reveal more about you than your clothes or your home. Sometimes it was a luxury, sometimes a sign of weakness, and sometimes a hiding place. I'm talking about something we all have today, but in the Middle Ages, it was the subject of serious debate. The hard pillow, a warrior's rest. If you think everyone had a pillow, you're wrong. In the early Middle Ages, right up until the 14th century, a soft pillow was seen as a sign of weakness or illness. A real man, a warrior, had to sleep on something hard. For a regular townsperson or peasant, a pillow was just a small bag, tightly stuffed with straw, hay, or if you were lucky, grain husks. It was hard, it was prickly, and it rustled with every move. But the worst thing was moisture. From your breath and sweat, the filling inside would start to rot. You might dry out a mattress, but a pillow was often used for years, until it turned into a compressed lump of mold and fungus. Real feather pillows were only for the elite. The down was collected by hand, and such a pillow cost as much as a herd of sheep. Since the bedroom wasn't a safe place, the pillow also served as a safe. Anything valuable, a purse of coins, a family ring, an important document, was hidden under your head. This created a kind of sleepy paranoia. People slept lightly because any move from your neighbor could mean they were trying to break into your pillow safe. And of course, insects were involved. The pillow was the main battleground for lice. They loved the heat of a human head. That's why nightcaps appeared, not just to keep warm, but to create a necessary barrier between your hair and the itchy crawling zoo living inside your pillow. It was a constant fight for basic comfort. But even if you survived your bedmates, the bugs in the mattress, and the pillow that could hide God knows what, there was still one more problem, right above your head. And because of it, medieval beds started to look like little tents, acting as a sturdy fortress against the cold and falling debris of the night. The bed tent, protection from drafts. Today, we see a canopy as a luxury, something from romantic movies about kings and princesses. But in reality, it wasn't about fashion. It was about harsh necessity. In the stone castles and wooden houses of Europe with no central heating, the canopy literally helped people survive the night. First, it worked as a simple but effective heat trap. The heavy fabric curtains closed off the space around the bed, creating a little cocoon of precious warm air. In cold houses where winter temperatures barely rose above freezing, a few extra degrees trapped inside that curtained bed felt like absolute salvation, a tiny oasis of life in a frozen room. Second, the canopy protected against drafts. The huge fireplaces used to heat halls and rooms created a powerful draft. Cold air constantly swept across the floor, and at night, the wind literally wandered through the room. The fabric curtains became the only barrier between the sleeper and that cold stream. Third, the canopy offered at least the illusion of privacy in a home where several people slept or servants might be present. And finally, there was one more reason: the ceiling. In houses with wooden beams or thatched roofs, tiny particles constantly fell from above. Dust, straw, splinters, and sometimes even traces of rodent activity. The canopy acted as a kind of filter, a simple protective cloth shield that stopped all that debris from falling right onto the face of the sleeping person. But even if the roof wasn't crumbling, the drafts stopped, and the canopy curtains protected you from the cold, the night still had one more trial in store. It stood right next to the bed and reminded you of its presence every time the room went quiet. An object so common in the medieval bedroom that people couldn't imagine the night without it. And it was this object that turned the closed room into a place where, by morning, the air was almost unbearable. Miasma and pots, air of the night. Before bed, windows were shut tight with heavy shutters. People believed that dangerous bad air, miasma, entered the house with the night cold. This miasma brought deadly disease, so they didn't let any fresh air in at all, fearing the unseen shadows of the night. As a result, by morning, a room where several people had slept turned into a heavy, stuffy space where the air literally stood still. But the main source of this nightly bouquet was an object found in almost every bedroom: the chamber pot. At night, no one wanted to go outside. The cold, the mud, and the darkness made that a risky proposition, so the pot stayed right under the bed or next to it until morning. In a closed room, the smell quickly intensified. Ammonia fumes mixed with hearth smoke, humidity, and the smell of the straw mattress. To a modern person, that atmosphere would be almost unbearable, but for people back then, it was just a normal part of nightlife. They were simply used to living in a world of strong smells, and the bedroom was the center of this unique nighttime aroma. But besides dealing with the chamber pot, people performed a strange-looking ritual before bed, one that many refused to skip. The night armor, linen and caps. Popular culture and cinema often paint a picture that medieval people slept naked the moment the candle went out. The reality was far more practical and down to earth. Those who could afford it always put on a special linen shirt for the night. Linen wicks away sweat, dries quickly, and served as an essential barrier between your body and the rough straw stuffing of the mattress. But the most characteristic piece of nighttime clothing was the cap. Literally everyone wore it, men and women, no matter their age. There were several reasons. First, warmth. In unheated homes, your head loses heat the fastest. A thick cap helped retain at least some warmth inside the curtained bed. Second, hygiene. Hair was considered a convenient hiding spot for the lice and fleas that lived in the straw mattress. The cap offered at least some protection against that tiny army of parasites. So going to bed was almost a ritual. Change into your nightshirt, put on your cap, close the shutters, draw the canopy curtains. Only then could you lie down, hoping the night ahead would be calm and not interrupted by cold fire or uninvited guests. Medieval sleep is not the romantic picture you see in movies about knights and castles. For most people, the night wasn't rest. It was a kind of small trial. And yet, people adapted to these conditions as naturally as we adapt today to city noise or the light of a screen before bed. For them, this was normal life, an ordinary night in an ordinary house. And maybe that's why they barely noticed many things that seem horrible to us, because this was their world. But if you had to spend one night in a bedroom like that, in a cold room on a straw palliasse with strangers next to you and a chamber pot under the bed, could you fall asleep? Let us know in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Next time, we'll see how kings slept.